Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Day one of testing is done in Bahrain and multiple teams will be going back to their garages tonight. Very happy with their day's work. Incredible reliability. Many of the theoretical front-running cars looking rather good on track, pretty dialed in. Certainly for day one of testing, and the fastest time of the day, nearly a second faster than the fastest car was this time last year. McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, smiles on their faces as well, and the Red Bull garage seemingly happier than maybe they expected to be with their car so far. This maybe raises more questions than it answers, but we have plenty to get into today. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it as well. We will start here with the Monaco Grand Prix. You guys remember we discussed this the other day, that Monaco or the FIA were considering a Monaco-specific mandated two-stop strategy. Now, I thought they might do this by saying, okay, instead of having two mandated compounds, i.e. you can use hard medium, medium soft, whatever you want, but that's how it currently is in F1, to say, all right, for Monaco, because it's a procession and it would be more entertaining if there were more pit stops, which I think is true, they would say, all right, you've got to use soft, medium, and hard. Instead, they're saying, no, you can use two compounds. If you don't want to use the hard tyre or the soft tyre or whatever, you don't have to, but you will have to do two mandatory stops. Now, this actually applies regardless of wet or dry, I believe. So even if it rains, I think they still have to use, what, 3 sets of intermediate tyres, hypothetically, which would still be quite something as well. But yeah, what do you guys think about this? I think it's a good thing. I'm just a little bit concerned, maybe, about the whole idea of having a track-specific implementation. It feels like a strange way to, like, oh, we're going to spice up Monaco. I don't mind this every Grand Prix. I'm just going to say it. I don't mind this happening for every Grand Prix. So it's an interesting approach to say, yeah, 2 mandatory stops. It's going to make Monaco more exciting. There are maybe other races where they could consider it as well, but also there have been great races in the past where one team's gone for a 1-stop, the other team's gone for a 2-stop, and it's made things rather dramatic, but that could also be true with 2 or 3 stops potentially, depending on the Grand Prix situation. So something to think about, but that's changing for Monaco. I think it probably is a good idea. The best idea, though, would be make the cars smaller so they can drive around Monaco far easier than they currently can, or get rid of Monaco, which I don't really think is the way to go or a particularly good idea, but my opinion keeps flip-flopping on that, really, whether I think Monaco should stay or go. But I do, tend to lean on the more heritage side. Now, this is Bahrain, a circuit that if it disappeared, I wouldn't really mind that much, but it is here in a few rounds' time, but it's not the season opener this year. But the opening events of the season, of course, have been the following. This was testing last year at the top, as you guys can tell, by the older graphics. I think this is mainly because Tag Heuer taken over as, Rolex has gone, Tag are here, so they're doing this whole rebrand. And, okay, what do you guys think about the new graphics? The one thing that really annoyed me at first, and I think they fixed this by the end of the day, was that the number 1 was taking up less space than the number 0, and therefore drivers that had 1s in their number, you can see how the delta here is offset between the people that have 0s and people that have 1s, and it just looked horrible. And thankfully they fixed it. I think they did fix it by the end of the day anyway. What do you guys think? It's a bit more blocky. I do think the contrast is nicer. I can see the drivers a little more clearly, which is nice. The only thing that I don't really like about the change is they've got the new radio box, which is very blocky, and I think it is a step down on last year. But there were so many things to discuss today. This was Hamilton and, of course, Angela Cullen arriving back at the track. It does raise so many questions on why Cullen departed with Hamilton controversially just after Bahrain 2023, when the discussion was, oh no, she just wants to spend more time with her family. And it's like, well, if you wanted to make that decision, maybe make it before the second round of the season. Could have been an off-season decision. We talked about that in depth a couple of years ago. But it does raise questions as to whether Mercedes kicked her out or didn't want her there or whatever. Definitely the theories on that have been circulating more, because as soon as Hamilton leaves, now she's back. No worries about the family time thing, right? So that's definitely a conversation that's being had. This as well, it seems the Toyota money, or maybe Gene Haas's wallet, who knows, is making some impact. They saved $250,000 in 2023 by having this pit side facility. They've now doubled it in size. So look at them go, man. Haas are making moves. Their car wasn't especially fast today, but it did look pretty good. And I will say that compared to last year, when there were so many very bland deliveries with not much colour on, It is a more lively grid this year. I think the Ferrari looks great. The Haas, I prefer this implementation than last year's one. I'm honestly not the biggest fan of the McLaren, but look, if it's fast, it's fast. The Alpine, to my eye, is a bit garish, but at least the blue is a nice shade. The Mercedes looks actually, surprisingly, at least from this angle, pretty dull. There's not that much going on. They're not really sponsors either, with the Ineos red disappearing as well. From the front, though, I actually do really like the Mercedes. And these are the other colours, because let's say the Sauber, I know there's a bit of flow-vis on this here, but the Sauber in the renders looks better than it does in reality, in my opinion. And I think the Williams looked worse in the renders than it does in reality. I still like the RB, but I think it looks better in certain, under the lights, I think it looks better than it does in the day. The Aston is always, I'm going to like British Racing Green, and the Red Bull is a Red Bull. So there you go, those are your cars. Now, we're going to talk about a lot today. We've already talked about a lot, and we've got plenty more to come. Subscribe if you haven't already. But Ferrari, are they going to be the best car on the grid? There was some speculation on this. Now, I saw this article today, I was like, wow, that's interesting, because testing hasn't even started yet, and there are rumours putting Ferrari's new car as the best car on the grid. Not even had a day of testing, even a minute of testing when this article came out. Turns out these rumours were from the Gazzetta, right? So Gazzetta, of course, Italian media publication. So is it a massive surprise that they were rumouring that the Ferrari is going to be stronger than McLaren? But basically their sources have apparently indicated that Ferrari have made more gains over winter than McLaren have, and Ferrari have now overtaken the McLaren. Is that the evidence we saw on track today? Well, you could read that into it. It's definitely an argument, but it's very difficult to say. It is literally the first day of testing, but I think there are a lot of takeaways. And for the positive, as far as we as fans are concerned, in terms of how competitive this season is about to be. This was Liam Lawson in the Red Bull. I will say, before he spun, the Red Bull looked pretty good. I was actually surprised, given what we've discussed over the last few days, that the Red Bull, they didn't seem that confident about it. I thought the Red Bull was pretty compliant under Lawson. He was pushing hard and, pushed too hard. They did come out for one stint where, the car wasn't really underneath him and he spun it at turn 3 into turn 4. Wasn't a great look, really. But on average today, the Red Bull was strong. It's the same as last year's Red Bull. It looks exactly the same as last year's Red Bull, pretty much in all respects. But of course, many of the changes underneath the bodywork, and Red Bull seem pretty confident after today that they've dialed out many of the issues they had with last year's car. But of course, it's also worth recognising that at Bahrain last year, they were spectacular, right? It was, this type of circuit just seems to be very good for their car. So again, that's the thing, whether this will be true everywhere or whether Red Bull are just really happy today with their performance of this particular circuit, that is another question. But I think Red Bull will be maybe happier than they expected to be after today, even though their car literally looks the same. And frankly, it's not changed much since 2022. The engine cover that they're using this year is actually, it's more similar to 2022 than it is to last year, dramatically so, which shows how right they got it, I guess, at the start of the regulations. This is how much Ferrari have changed. This is last year's Ferrari on the left, the new Ferrari on the right. The rear wing is different, the beam wing is different, the engine cover is different, the side pod is slightly different. Certainly the inlet is. The back of the side pod and the shaping is also different. There's more of an undercut this year. The front suspension is different. That was a Ferrari that nearly won last year's World Constructors' Championship, and it's a Ferrari that has dramatically changed for this season. The Red Bull, there is no side-by-side of the Red Bull, because you'd think that it was just a mirror image, right, of last year's car to this year's car, but the Ferrari is dramatically different, as you guys can tell. They've clearly taken a big step, at least they believe they've made a big step in terms of their progression, and this is the Mercedes versus the new Red Bull by comparison, because, of course, there are, if you look at the new Mercedes, some very Red Bull-esque features. We talked about that yesterday, even the wing mirror, I guess, might be one example here, but certainly the inlet to the side pods, the vertical and horizontal inlet that they have, the shape of the side pods, the undercut. Of course, Mercedes, they were still using a push rod front suspension, so that's dramatically different. The engine cover is different as well. You guys can see that the engine cover on the Merc looks much wider, which it is, but it's also thinner at the base, if you see what I mean. So the components have to be packaged somewhere. You can either make it fatter at the bottom and then thinner up the sides, or you can do it as Mercedes do, which is to try and, compartmentalize them slightly differently. So it's not like the Red Bull should necessarily be more aerodynamically efficient. It's just from this angle, it looks dramatically different, right? But people are going to say, the cars are quite similar. I don't really know if they do. For the final year of the regulations, yes, the side pods have serious similarities, but I still think you look at these cars and you say there are some substantial differences here for the new 2025 season. And this, of course, is the comparison between the Ferrari and the Red Bull. Now, this is more similar, really. The side pods, again, are roughly similar. Of course, the front suspension is the same. Well, not the same, but the same concept, the same geometry on both sections. But again, the engine cover is different. The beam wing setup is different. The rear wing is significantly different as well. So, yeah, fascinating, I think, is the bottom line of all of this stuff. The big talking point of the start of the day was flexible wings. Because we discussed it yesterday, that Red Bull have seemingly kept the car very, very similar to last year, but of course they are hoping for performance improvements. Now, there was a rumour, and this seems to be true based on how frustrated Horner has been with the handling of this flexi-wing stuff, is that Red Bull put a lot of resources, a lot of developments into effectively taking last year's concept and fixing it using a flexible wing. We talked about how this is possible because a flexi front wing that reduces in its drag when it's at high speeds tends to be very, very important for the balance of these cars. Given how powerful the floor is nowadays and when these new boats of a car really tend to be, let's say, more volatile when it comes to understeer and oversteer, when those things tend to creep in more, the flexible front wing manages that a lot. And there's a general feeling, at least Red Bull seemed to feel this way last year, that the big gains that McLaren had made were pretty much from this flexi wing technology and the way that it impacted the way that they could set up other parts of the car. So Red Bull have done a lot of work clearly making that happen. You can see an example here. You can see an example on the Aston Martin as well of the flexibility of their front wing. But of course, after Spain, this is getting removed. And there's been a bit of a debate on this, right? Because it seems like Red Bull may have fixed their problems by saying, okay, we're going to keep last year's car the same, but we're fundamentally from the outside. Inside, they say there are many changes, but they're going to fix it with the front wings. Of course, if they are removing those effectively from the Spanish Grand Prix onwards, it raises questions. It could go one of two ways. One argument would be Red Bull are going to suffer, right? And I think this seems more likely than the other alternative. Red Bull have put a lot of resources into this, and it's now going to be gone. The other teams already developed it, so their resources have gone elsewhere. The other alternative is, though, is to say, okay, well, when flexi wings weren't a thing, as in, you know, let's say this time last year, Red Bull were the strongest car because they had fundamentally the best ideas, I guess. And maybe the argument could be that the McLaren was just a front wing, flexi wing merchant. But, you know, McLaren don't seem to buy that idea. So I think, if anything, you could take Horner's frustration about the flexi wings to probably say Red Bull don't expect to be helped by it. But it is certainly a conversation. So the cars hit the track. Here's Hamilton on track for the first time in the red. Car number 44. Kind of a great image at the top here because you've got Mattia Binotto, or now it's Sauber, who of course used to be team principal at Ferrari, looking over there at Hamilton driving the new Ferrari. And a few things were mentioned here in terms of what the teams are working on the day, what they're working on the front end. Look, the bottom line is from testing today, the teams were working on themselves. They weren't really looking at other teams. They weren't really looking at the timesheets, apart from their own timesheets and what they were potentially expecting to happen. But quite a lot of changes were seen. Mercedes tried out 2 different specifications of front nose. Thought that was interesting. And Hamilton completed his first session and had a smile on his face, seemed pretty happy about it. So look, the body language experts are out in force discussing like whether the guys are happy, whether they're not happy, because there was a picture later on of Charles Leclerc and Fred Vasseur looking kind of frustrated. Actually, Sim might have tweeted it. You reckon I can find it real quick? I'm not sure it was actually on her account, but I might as well just have a quick little stroll because I think it might have been anyway, that obviously loads of images from today. Yeah, here was the one on the right-hand side here, with Vasseur and Leclerc maybe not looking so happy. But look, things change and you get another shot later on of Leclerc absolutely buzzing. This was a funny one of the Mercedes guys, this generator that presumably has been holed up since Abu Dhabi, not been touched. They unveiled it for Bahrain, and this guy realised, hang on a second, this has got Hamilton's number on it. It's got his 44 decal, so unfortunately, you know, they had to peel this off. I thought was quite a moment of the day, really. But after the first half of the day, there was, well, we'll have a look at the timing sheets after that in a second, but most teams are pretty happy. It was a pretty uneventful day. There were no real reliability problems. The McLaren maybe didn't do quite as many laps at the start as they might have expected to do. But Piastri says, car's feeling pretty good, trying to get the car in a better window. We're happy with how it's going, but there are a few teams that are looking pretty good, and that is certainly still true by the end of the day. Russell was definitely pointing at McLaren and saying these these guys are looking confident. Lando says they found a lot over the winter. McLaren are going to be pretty strong. That's what George says. But the timings are as follows. Kimi Antonelli not only did the most laps of the morning, tied with Yuki Tsunoda, but actually set the fastest lap as well. Now, of course, the morning times are going to be slower than the afternoon times, track conditions, rubbering in, that type of stuff. But yeah, look, the timesheets, it's not that relevant. Hamilton was top for some time. Lawson was top for some time. Doohan was nearly top for some time. Piastri in P8, but the McLaren's not, the 8th fastest car. Antonelli tops the sheet. So, just wanted to mention it. We're not going to do any more analysis really on the timings. I thought was interesting though, that Christian Horner was discussing the RB21, the progress they've made, and he says, we've had a good winter, we've prepared well. So I think the conclusion really from Red Bull today, I think they're pretty happy with things. Maybe happier than they expected to be, and maybe Max is happier as well. He had some good laps in there. They may be missing a bit of performance, which is pretty remarkable, but it's possible compared to what we've seen from the other teams. But I really do think we're in for a banger season, because even in the morning of testing today, the lap times were close, right? Like, whatever run plans these teams were operating on, these cars are competitive. I'd be very, very surprised if the season starts and there's 1 or 2 cars that are way ahead or way behind. It doesn't really feel like that's the case in what we saw today, but it's day 1 of testing. Who knows? Maybe more will happen over the coming days. Horner also says that, yeah, the car that we see on track today for Red Bull, that is the car they are going to Melbourne with basically no changes. That is at least the idea. This is Hadjar going for a spin, so both of the Red Bull juniors, as it were, with Hadjar and then Lawson both having a bit of a spin in their car today. This was the 55 Williams of Sainz getting some old Ferrari magic back here with some of the red paint Flovis, and actually I like it on their car, I'm not gonna lie, it kind of goes hard on the Williams. But of course people were looking at the laps as well, the onboards, how these cars are performing, and this was an onboard from Max, his fastest lap at this time of the day, and it was a pretty clean lap. Now look, maybe you should expect this. It's the final year of the regulations, the cars are going to be as dialed in as they are ever going to be. But Max looked pretty comfortable in the car. No major corrections. It didn't look like he was struggling with this machine as we have previously seen, and the same was kind of true for the Ferrari as well. Leclerc on this particular lap was really smooth. I think on the Ferrari, one thing to really look out for tomorrow if you do watch the rest of testing is just its acceleration out of the slow speed corners. I saw it with Hamilton at this specific corner, and I think the way that Leclerc takes it is actually better because he takes it right over the inside curb. But the acceleration and the traction that Ferrari gets out of these corners, I do believe is better than any other car. It certainly looks that way, and it has been a strength of them for some time, and it doesn't look like that's gone away with this car either. Leclerc, therefore, was P1 for a while, covered up purple sectors. The C3, by the way, is going to be the most commonly used tyre this season, but at Bahrain, this is actually going to be the soft tyre when they come back here in several weeks' time. The one note from the Ferrari garage was that here come the engineers, and look at them smiling away, look at them giggling and smiling. Maybe they're chuckling about something, who knows. But they went to this camera after Leclerc at the fastest lap, and then people are saying, oh, here we go. They're happy about things. All of a sudden, though, drama unfolds. There was a bit of rain in Bahrain, which is very rare to say, but there was, and it's seemingly caused a power outage. I don't really know what caused it. I know there's been talk about it as well to say, should we really be going to these circuits if this is what the facilities are like? But yeah, the Red Bull garage and then other garages lost power and they had to red flag the session for a very long time. Piastri tweeted something out, and then finally the oil generators kicked back in and everything was up and running again. But therefore they gave them an extra 1 hour of testing time, and well, it gave the teams more opportunity. The fastest lap of the day went to Lando Norris, and this was an impressive lap. A 1:30.4 he put in, which is substantially faster than anybody else. It's testing, who knows, fuel loads, tough to say. But today felt a bit more like an FP1 session than it did a typical day 1 of a test. And I think that goes to show how confident and competitive these teams currently are. But it is worthy of note, day 1 last year, Max had the fastest time with a 1:31.3. Now, sure, the lap times, different conditions, everything, right? But the cars are faster. I think there's really no doubt about that. And this was Charles. After his testing session, he looked pretty happy about it. So what's the takeaways? What do the body language experts say? It's a very good question. One more thing to discuss here in a second before we get there. Helmut Marko says, what I can say is that Max had a very good long run and he feels the car better than last year's model, and the new car also reacts more predictably. Those were our weaknesses last year. It looks like we've taken a step forward, but of course it's worth remembering at testing last year, Max said that the car was so compliant it did whatever he wanted. They then lost their way a bit. So they may well have refound their way. But of course, the other teams may be right there with them, and who knows if they can maintain it. But I think Red Bull will be pretty happy with their day, as will McLaren, I'm sure, topping the timesheets. This was how things looked with about 30 minutes to go. And then interestingly enough, Lando Norris came out with a load of Flovis paint on the car. That was remarkable, honestly. I don't think I've ever seen this much Flovis on a car. And then we had the McLaren team forming a wall to prevent any of the photographers actually seeing it. And then there was this funny image that was on the broadcast of this photographer trying to get a couple of shots and the McLaren team blocking him out. So that was very entertaining. But at the end of the day, end of day one of testing, this is what we find. So as I say, there's not too much to read into this yet. Tomorrow and the next day, there will be more talk about these times, but I think the bottom line is it's pretty competitive. Antonelli's fastest lap time for the morning, that's still roughly held up. That was P7 by the end of the day, but Lando, Russell, Verstappen, Leclerc were your top 4 teams. Then it was Sainz, Gasly, Antonelli, Lawson, Albon, Tsunoda, and etc. on from there. So a couple of things to mention really on the overall standings of the day. The top 4 teams of the day are the top 4 theoretical teams, right? The 4 teams we expect. McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull to be at the top of the timesheets. The Ferrari looked really good in Leclerc's hands, but when they went out slightly later on for another run in slightly better conditions, they maybe lost the balance a bit in the hands of Leclerc. So that was a question as to whether that's an issue, something they can dial out. It is day one of testing after all, probably no big deal. The other story is on the straight line speed, and there was some discussion that the Ferrari, they've worked a lot on their aerodynamic efficiency. That seems to be paying dividends so far. Behrman was way off the pace, but Haas basically all day adjusted long runs on the harder tyres. But very much into your thoughts in the comment section below, because I think we have a very exciting season ahead based on what we have seen today. Long video. Appreciate you guys if you watched to the ends. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.